The Florida State Seminoles are representing at the 2024 NFL Draft.
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everyone. I am Brian Smith. Welcome back into Locked On Seminoles. This is going to be a special edition talking strictly about the 2024 NFL Draft, including 6 players taken in the first 3 rounds for the Noles. So we're going to break that down here in 1 second, right after I talk about LinkedIn jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. 6 players in the first 3 rounds. Ask yourself this as a Florida State fan. When was the last time they did that? When was the last time they did that and they managed it the year before they left? It wasn't wasted talent. Combine the two. Like Florida State had some good teams after the 2013 title team and had some guys drafted, etc. Don't get me wrong. But maximizing talent is something that Florida State has not done for a very long time. Give Mike Norvell and his staff credit, whether it's a kid that was a 3-star, a 5-star, a transfer, a walk-on, whatever. Players all across the board, not even the ones just being drafted too, this is across the board, are getting good coaching. We wouldn't be having this podcast if they weren't. That's just reality. Let me give you an example. While Jared Verse went 19th, he's a guy that played at Albany and transferred. I've talked about this 50 times. Take the next guy that really is bizarre in this whole thing. Another defensive lineman, 39th overall in the draft, originally playing in the MAC before he came to Florida State this last year for 1 season, Braden Fisk. Now, he was a good player, don't get me wrong, but he had 6 sacks. He was very disruptive, and he actually helped take pressure off of Jared Verse on the edge, because if you didn't pay attention and scheme against Braden, he was going to beat up your interior guys and he was going to make plays. 6 sacks as an interior defensive lineman is very impressive at any level because you get so many double teams and there's not a lot of space to work with. Great hustle, great motor, and a really powerful guy. Did great at the NFL Combine. Florida State prepared him for the next level. Again, give them credit. Strength and conditioning program, Oda Hagens, the defensive staff in general, whatever you want to say, everybody in some way, shape, or form helped this young man get there. So let's talk about the players, the picks, all the way through. But let's go with the first 3 rounds first. Break that down, and I'm going to explain why it's so important to Florida State. And the fan base should understand this, but I want to make sure. Number one, Florida State has not been successful out of high school recruiting defensive ends in the last 5 years. They have not by their standards, not in the stratosphere. They just haven't. Now, I understand Verse is a transfer. I get it, but those kids need to see Florida State first-round pick, first off, and then defensive linemen. It is vital. The teams that win national titles recruit 5-star defensive linemen, period. The teams that win it always have some. Now, Verse is the weirdest of all situations. I get it. From Albany, etc. You're not going to win that battle very often. And you still didn't have enough to get it done last year anyway, even with 2 elite guys. You need 3 or 4 elite guys. They're on the cusp, but they're not quite where they need to be. Having a guy go in the first round is huge. He's going to the Rams. I think he's going to play some outside linebacker, and they'll move him around, put his hand in the dirt sometimes. Verse will be a pain in the butt for NFL teams because he's a really twitchy guy and really powerful, heavy hands, as they say. I think he's going to be great, and it will help Florida State recruiting long-term. Second guy, it was really interesting. First guy off the board in the second round was Keon Coleman to the Bills with the 33rd selection. I think it's interesting because he can be the boundary, and Diggs, who's their number one, that's a good combination. He's going to get a lot of single coverage. I'm curious to see how well Keon does against NFL corners and those man-on-man matchups, fade balls, back shoulder fades, deep outs. He's not going to have it easy, but they're going to give him a chance. They think a lot of him, and good for him because I thought he might skip all the way to the 3rd round. He almost made it into the 1st round. That shows you how unpredictable the NFL draft is, though, and congrats to Mr. Coleman. Fisk is the player I just mentioned a second ago, 39th overall. He's going to the Rams as well. They got 2 Noles headed out to Los Angeles. They wanted to get more beef. Aaron Donald is done. That's a good guy to help fit on the interior. He could be a rotational piece, maybe start, but I think he'll be a very good player there. Renardo Green, 64th overall, also in the state of California, going to San Francisco to play for the Niners. Good for him. Trey Benson goes in the third round to Arizona. That's a power football player right there. I think he can also catch well. He'll fit in well in a dual system with the Cardinals. And then Jaron Jones, 96th overall, third round to the Jags. He gets to stay in the Deep South and not that all that far away. He's about 2 hours from Tallahassee, so good for him. That's the first 3 rounds. Here's the question I have for Florida State fans on this somewhat shortened Locked On Seminoles podcast. When was the last time that both of these categories happened that you remember? Florida State had a lot of talent, maximized it during a single season, whether they made the title or whatever. And then right after that, the next year in the draft, those players went high in the draft. Not one or the other, both. You know how I like to say it. You don't get one, you have to get both to be successful because it keeps the ball rolling. Recruits see where the players go in the draft, fair or not, and it impacts recruiting a lot. You must do well in the draft. 6 guys going in the first 3 rounds. They were almost the top team in the draft with that. So here are a couple totals to kind of put things in perspective. Florida State, I believe, had 13 guys, I want to say, at the combine. Michigan was number 1 far and away with 18. In the first 3 rounds alone, just the first 3 rounds, I'm not talking about the rest of it, first 3 rounds alone, Michigan had 7 guys, Georgia had 6, Florida State had 6, Notre Dame had 3, Ohio State, surprisingly, only had 2. USC had 3, LSU had 4, Bama had 6, Washington, this is the surprise, and it shows their good coaching. They did a really good job there. They had 7. That's incredible. Penn State had 3, Oregon had 3, Texas had 5, Oklahoma had 1, Clemson had 2. There are a few other schools that were in there too, but those are some of the main ones. Here again is the key, though. When you're mentioned with Georgia and Washington, Michigan, like teams that were in the top 5, that's good. You're maximizing your talent. Teams that kind of did well, but couldn't get quite over the hump, etc. There are plenty of those. Florida State has ascended. They've wasted talent for far too long. Here's something else about it that I find interesting. When I was growing up, Florida State's defense conservatively was top 10 every year, just about every weekend. They had a few off games here or there, but by and large, Florida State's D was dominant. They had 2 defensive linemen, 2 defensive backs go in the first 3 rounds. That's a great sign. If you're going to get back to the elite level of college football, and there's still work to be done, Florida State's run defense wasn't as good as it should have been last year. They weren't deep enough. But if you're going to get back to that elite level year after year, it's defense. Corner and D-line are by far the hardest spots to recruit. There's fewer of them, and a lot of these guys are very fickle. Florida State now can say, hey, we're developing guys and putting them in the NFL. It's fact. It's right here. They've got it on their Twitter page. You can look at, they've got a lot of stuff on Florida State's Twitter page. It's great, or X, whatever you want to call, and that's great. I think Florida State's doing a good job of promoting their program, and I think everybody should give them a big tip at the cap. Before I get out of here, one last thing. When I looked at this, and I'm going to do a lot deeper dive Monday night. I've got a tournament I'm going to be at this weekend, so I won't be around for Monday morning for an early podcast. It'll be later in the day. But looking at the numbers, it was surprising to me on some of these teams that are perceived to be really good. Like Oklahoma had 1 guy. Just 1 guy drafted. First-round pick, but still this one. And oh, how the mighty have fallen. Clemson only had 2. Got a first-rounder and a second fastest guy in the draft, their corner, Wiggins. But, I mean, it's surprising how things fluctuate. Ohio State only had 2. Florida State is ascending on the talent, and they're developing well. And as I like to say a lot, Florida State probably evaluates the portal better than any other team. You can argue against that if you want. At the very least, one of the top 2 or 3. I think that's a conservative estimate. I personally think it's number 1, but, if you want to go with somebody else, go right ahead. This bodes well for Florida State's program long-term, and I think that everybody should understand that this 2025 class, this is even going to help it. All the official visits are getting ready to happen for the Noles. When you see these guys getting drafted, you can't tell me that doesn't have an impact on a 17, 18-year-old young man, his family and his friends, etc. Something to think about. So on Monday, we'll get a little more depth on the draft. We're going to talk some recruiting. We're also going to talk a little more portal. It ends this next week. That's a very big part of what's getting ready to happen. This is the time where everything kind of goes together for about a week. It's pretty topsy-turvy for me. Could be a lot of news, maybe not, but it's hard to say. The portal and recruiting are really lighting up right now. So We'll talk all about that on Monday. Please like and subscribe to this podcast, hit that notification bell, and share this pod. If you have anything you want to ask about or something you want me to cover, comment on YouTube, and I'll get to it as soon as I can. Everybody have a great weekend. Thank you very much.